It's a fair question, and it's a big one. When you think about him, what do you hear first? Is it a sneer? A rock and roll shout? Is it the sound of a cultural explosion, the thing that scared parents and made teenagers feel alive? For a long time, that was the whole story. The voice was part of the package, but the package was the main event. The hips, the hair, the look in his eyes, he was a force of nature, a rebellion in a single body. And forces of nature aren't always thought of as subtle. They aren't always considered artists. They're just there. A hurricane isn't praised for its technique, so for years, that's how many people saw him. He was the hurricane. The critics, the establishment, the people who preferred their music polite and in its proper place, they didn't hear a singer. They heard a gimmick. They heard a loud, undisciplined kid from Mississippi who got lucky. They heard the screams of the crowd more than they heard the notes he was singing. And to be fair, sometimes the screams were louder. He gave them plenty of ammunition. The songs like Hound Dog or Jailhouse Rock were raw, visceral things. They weren't about vocal purity. They were about energy, they were about a feeling. He would growl, he would hiccup, he would slide around the notes, sometimes landing on them, sometimes using them as a launching pad for something else entirely. It was exciting, it was dangerous, but to a trained ear from that era, it might have sounded like a mess. It wasn't Bing Crosby, it wasn't Frank Sinatra, it wasn't Perry Como, it wasn't proper singing, and so the narrative was set. He was a phenomenon, not a vocalist, a star, not a singer. A temporary fad that would burn out once the kids grew up and the noise died down. That's what they all thought. That's what they wrote in the papers. He was a rock and roller, and rock and roll was disposable. It was simple, crude, and it wouldn't last. Neither would he. But the people who really listened, the ones who could hear past the electric guitars and screaming, they knew something else was going on. They knew from the very beginning. Even in the early days at Sun Records, when he was just a nervous kid trying to find his sound, you could hear it. You could hear the raw material of one of the greatest voices of the century. It was just buried under the image. Think about some of those early, quieter songs. Think about a song like Blue Moon. He takes that old standard and turns it into a ghostly, eerie ballad. His voice is a high, lonely thing. It's full of echo and space. It's not about power. It's about atmosphere. Or a song like I Was the One. It's a simple pop song, but listen to his control. Listen to the way he glides into his falsetto. It's effortless, it's beautiful. That wasn't a hurricane, that was a singer. And then came the big ballads. Love Me Tender. It's a simple melody, almost a lullaby, but he sings it with such incredible sincerity. There's a softness there, a vulnerability that was the total opposite of the swaggering rock and roll kid. People heard that. It became a massive hit. It showed a different side, but it was still seen as a side, a change of pace. The real him was the guy in the gold suit, shaking his legs. Or a song like Don't. That song is a masterclass in vocal control. It's a bluesy, slow burn of a song. He sings most of it in a low, quiet murmur. He's pleading. He's holding back. You can feel the tension in his voice. He's not shouting, he's simmering. And when he finally lets a little power out, it means something. The critics might not have paid attention, but other singers did. They knew how hard it was to sing with that kind of restraint, to convey that much emotion with so little volume. So the proof was there all along. It was on the B-sides, it was on the album tracks. It was in the gospel music he loved and recorded with such passion. If you listen to his gospel records, you couldn't deny his talent. The harmonies, the power, the feeling, it was all there. He had a huge vocal range, an instinctive sense of harmony, and an ability to inhabit a lyric that you just can't teach. He could sound tough, tender, joyful, or heartbroken, sometimes all in the same song. But the world wasn't listening for that. The world had already made up its mind. He was the king of rock and roll, and kings of rock and roll don't do subtlety. They don't do nuance, they kick down the door, they don't stay in the concert hall and fill it with a perfectly controlled vibrato. Then everything changed. He got drafted. In 1958, at the absolute peak of his fame, he had to trade his guitar for a rifle. He was sent to Germany. For 2 years he was gone. No new movies, no tours, no television appearances, just a few songs he'd recorded beforehand trickling out to keep his name alive. And it seemed like a disaster for his career. The rock and roll fad he was leading could easily die out without him there to stoke the fire. People move on. Tastes change. 2 years is an eternity in pop music. But that time away was the most important thing that could have happened to him. It did two things. First, it changed his public image. The sneering rebel was gone. In his place was Private Presley, a patriot, a good soldier doing his duty. He cut his hair, he wore a uniform. The parents who hated him before suddenly had to respect him. He wasn't a danger to their kids anymore, he was one of them. It was the greatest PR move in history, and it wasn't even planned as one. Second, it changed him. He was no longer a kid. He was a man in his mid-20s. He had seen a bit of the world. And his voice had changed too. It had deepened. It had matured. It had gained a new richness, a new power that wasn't there before. The time off from constant touring had let it rest and settle, and while he was in Germany, he listened to music. All kinds of music. He was always a sponge, soaking up influences from blues, country, gospel, and pop. In Europe, he was exposed to different sounds. He heard opera. He heard the great European tenors. He heard big, romantic, sweeping melodies. There was one song in particular he liked. It was an old song, an English language version of a famous Italian tune. The version he heard was by a singer named Tony Martin, and it was called There's No Tomorrow. He loved it. He played it over and over. He would sing along to it, practicing. He told people that he wanted to record a song like that one day. A song with that kind of passion, that kind of grand scale. When he finally came home in 1960, the world was holding its breath. What would he do now? Would he go back to rock and roll? Was he still relevant? The anticipation was huge. He did a television special with Frank Sinatra, the old guard and the new guard together on one stage. It was a symbolic moment. He was welcomed back into the mainstream. His first single after the army was Stuck on You. It was a solid hit. A fun, mid-tempo rocker. It was familiar, it told the world he was back, and he could still rock. But it didn't break new ground. It was him picking up where he left off. The B-side, Fame and Fortune, was a nice ballad. But it was in the same vein as his 50s work. Good, but not a revolution. Then came the second single, and this was something else entirely. This was the moment everything tilted. The record company was nervous about it. It wasn't rock and roll, it wasn't what people expected from him, it was a huge risk. But he insisted. This was the song he had been thinking about in Germany. He went into the studio in Nashville. He had the melody, that classic Italian melody that everyone in the world knew, even if they didn't know its name. He had new lyrics written just for him. The song was a ballad, a big, dramatic, almost theatrical ballad. It starts quietly. He sings in a low, warm, intimate voice. He's telling a story of love that can't wait. The arrangement is simple at first. A gentle guitar, a soft rhythm. He's completely in control. Every word is clear, every note is perfect. There's no hiccup, no growl. This is not the kid from the 50s. This is a mature vocalist, confident and relaxed. He builds the song, line by line. The emotion starts to swell. The orchestra comes in, the strings soaring behind him. The background vocalists add their support, but your ear is always focused on his voice. He's using the full range of his instrument. He sings with a deep, resonant baritone in the verses. Then he climbs, smoothly and powerfully, into his tenor range for the chorus. The melody is demanding. It requires real breath control, real technique. You can't just shout your way through it. You have to sing it. And he is singing it beautifully. But it's the ending that changes everything. It's the part that no one saw coming. The song builds and builds to a huge crescendo. The orchestra is at full power. The background singers are soaring. And then he does it. He takes a breath and he unleashes a note that silenced every single critic. It's a high, powerful operatic note, held with perfect vibrato. It rings out, clear as a bell. It's a note that a trained opera singer would be proud of. It's pure, beautiful, and breathtakingly powerful. And then, after holding this massive climactic note, he doesn't just stop. He comes down from it gracefully and finishes the song with a soft, tender whisper. That was the masterstroke. The power was one thing, but the control to go from that huge operatic climax to a gentle, intimate ending in the space of a few seconds. That was undeniable artistry. That was proof. When that record was released, it exploded. It wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. It went to #1 all over the world. The United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, everywhere. It sold millions and millions of copies. It became his biggest selling single ever, a record that still stands. And it did exactly what he wanted it to do. It forced the world to reevaluate him. People who had dismissed him as a no-talent hoodlum heard that song on the radio and had to stop what they were doing. Parents heard it and thought, wait a minute, this is beautiful. Music critics heard it and had to admit, begrudgingly or not, that the guy could actually sing. Really sing. It shattered the box they had put him in. He was no longer just the king of rock and roll. He was a vocalist, a balladeer, an artist who could handle complex melodies and sophisticated arrangements. He could have stood on a stage next to any of the great crooners of the day and held his own. That one song proved it to millions of people who had refused to believe it before. Of course, as we said, the talent was always there. The people who loved his 50s music knew it. The musicians he worked with knew it. Sam Phillips, the man who discovered him, knew it from the first day he walked into the studio. But this was different. This was public proof on a global scale. It was an event. It was like a great actor who is only known for action movies suddenly giving a performance that gets him nominated for an Oscar. The talent was always there, but now everyone had to acknowledge it. The song changed the direction of his career. It opened the door for him to record more ballads, more sophisticated pop material. It led to albums like His Hand in Mine, a gospel masterpiece, and soundtracks that were filled with lush, romantic songs. It paved the way for the Las Vegas years, where he would stand on stage, a commanding figure in a jumpsuit, and sing a huge variety of music. He would rock out, sure. But he would also sing gospel hymns that could move you to tears, and he would sing those big, powerful ballads that showed off the incredible range and beauty of his voice. He became an all-around entertainer, not just a genre artist, and this song was the pivot point. So was it the song that proved to the world he could actually sing? In a way, yes. It wasn't the first piece of evidence. The evidence had been there for years, hiding in plain sight. But it was the piece of evidence that was so loud, so clear, and so commercially massive that it could not be ignored. It was the closing argument in the case for his talent. Before that record, you could still argue that he was just a fad. You could still claim it was more about the image than the voice. After that record, you couldn't make that argument anymore. You just couldn't. The proof was right there, coming out of every radio in the world. The power, the range, the control, the emotion. It was all in that one performance. It was a statement. It said, "You thought you knew who I was. You were wrong." It was a risk that paid off in the biggest way imaginable. It cemented his status as not just a star, but as one of the defining voices of the 20th century. He had already conquered the world of rock and roll. With this song, he conquered the rest of the world too. He proved he wasn't just the king of a single genre, he was the king. Period. And he did it not with a wiggle of his hips, but with the sheer undeniable power and beauty of his voice. The song, of course, was It's Now or Never.